We begin tonight's broadcast with some big numbers for motorists out there. Get ready to shell out more cash with oil prices getting jacked up again. Price of unleaded gasoline in NCR can now go from 65 to as high as 75 pesos per liter. Premium gasoline, meanwhile, can cost you 70 to 75 pesos a liter. Diesel at 60 to 65 pesos a liter.
This comes as the cost of fuel has seen 7 straight weeks of price increases due to limited supply in the world market. This year alone, diesel price has gone up by 10 pesos, while gasoline inched higher by close to 8 pesos a liter. With that, transport groups once again call for a fair price hike. Good evening, I'm Gretchen Ho.
I'm Robbie Alampa. You're watching The Big Story. 7 straight weeks of oil price hikes, and the Energy Department says this may extend until June.
But how can transport drivers keep up with more expensive fuel? They're now asking for an increase in fare rates. Mon Gualvez with The Big Story.
As a delivery rider, Rene used to allot 150 pesos for gasoline daily. But since the series of oil price hikes, he now has to double that amount.
Kasi yung kinikita namin halos napupunta na lang din sa pagkain, sa gasolina. Siyempre magtatapa pa kami.
Like Rene, jeepney drivers also now spend twice on gas. From 500 pesos daily, they now shell out 1,000. Times like this, they can only hope for a fair adjustment.
Taasan naman din ang pamasahe kahit konti para maging balance lang naman sa mga driver.
Taasan lang pamasahe. Sa krudo lang din kami namumuhunan eh.
This is the 7th consecutive time oil prices have been jacked up just for this year. A liter of diesel has gone up by 1 peso and 5 centavos. There's also an additional 1 peso and 20 centavos per liter of gasoline. In the metro, a liter of unleaded or premium gasoline can go as high as 75 pesos. Kerosene, meanwhile, now ranges from 58 to 65 pesos per liter. The hike, explains the Energy Department, is due to supply shortage in the world market.
Nung entrada po ng 2022, may mga issues po ang supply side. Unang-una, nagka-problema po tayo sa Libya at sa gulo ng Kazakhstan. Libya and Kazakhstan, at yung Ecuador nagkaroon ng aksidente po sa pipeline nila.
What's worse, the DOE projects oil prices to stay elevated until mid-year.
Lahat po to, ang projection po ng plot is mag-i-ease out ito hanggang second quarter, end of second quarter, May to June.
Pasang Mazda could not wait that long. As early as January, they already filed a petition asking for a revert to the 10 peso minimum fare from the current 9 pesos.
Not enough ang subsidy ng 1 billion noong last year na pinagkalog ng DOTR, ubos na yan. Ngayon maglalagay na naman ng subsidy na halos ganun din.
They also want capacity restrictions to be eased. Concerned transport groups are set to meet with the LTFRB on Wednesday to discuss this. For News 5, Mon Gualvez, we are One News.
What's the reason behind the oil price hike, and how long can we expect prices to change? We have tonight Assistant Director Rodela Romero of the Department of Energy Oil Industry Management Bureau. Director Romero, welcome to The Big Story.
Yes, good evening everyone.
Good evening po. Maybe you could give us more insights on what's causing this, but also we want to ask, if we're blaming a lot of this on external factors, where are we getting, therefore, the confidence to say that by May or June, baka mag-stabilize na to?
Yeah, okay. Let me say that's true. This is the 7th week that we have consecutive increases of the petroleum products. And katulad po ng madalas naming sabihin that the Philippines is a net importer of petroleum products. Means lahat ng inaangkat nating langis ay nanggagaling sa labas ng bansa. So we need dollars to buy those. So basically, based on the monitoring of the Department of Energy on the world oil market developments, the reason for the continued oil price increases, first is the increase in the oil demand. Ibig sabihin, tumaas yung pangangailangan sa langis dahilan po sa pagbalik ng ekonomiya out of the pandemic. Nagre-recover na yung ekonomiya ng bansa yung mga economic activities nag-boom again. Like for instance, yung pong what is called is the mobility index. Tumaas po ang mobility index. Marami nang nagbiyahe using their own vehicles. Instead of taking a public utility vehicles or a mass transit, they use their own vehicles para makaiwas na rin po sa virus. Then the second one, tumaas ang world demand. Unfortunately, tama po kayo, there's a tightness in the oil supply, the world oil supply. And based on the records ng Platts, there's a minimal difference between the world demand and the world supply. So any supply disruption would definitely affect the price. Like in the case of December 2021, there's a deficit of 1.83 million barrels of oil per day. And then those other factors that would contribute to the supply tightness. They mentioned earlier the explosion in Nigeria, and top on the list, di po ba, nababalitaan nyo, the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So it's a geopolitical conflict. And then there's some technical consideration also. There's also an oil spill in the pipeline of Ecuador, and then the Kazakhstan diversion of their imports to their consumption.
So malinaw po, both
so those
on the,
are the factors.
So malinaw po, both on the supply side and the demand side may problema tayo. But as we always say, we worry about what we can control. What can we control? Ano pong pwedeng gawin ng gobyerno at ng buong lipunan? Is there anything that is within our control in this kind of a situation?
Yeah, tama po. Yung world development, wala po tayong control. So ano nga ba ang ginagawa ng Department of Energy? I heard some news from Kaobet, yung mga transport sector po na nag-a-appeal. So considering that the primary objective ng Department of Energy is to ensure security of supply, na dapat may magagamit po talaga tayong petroleum products. So we had a meeting with the oil stakeholders or the oil companies na siguraduhin po nila na yung supply contract nila for 2022 maayos at reasonable price. Kasi in the event na magkaroon ng escalation yung mga tension sa mga hindi po natin makontrol. Tapos at the same time po, nagkaroon din ng partnership ang Department of Energy with the Department of Agriculture po para mabigyan ng a sort of targeted relief o pangsamantalang tulong ang ating mga kapatid na farmers or the fisher folks. So merong nakalaan na parang fuel discount program for the farmers and the fisher folks. And then on the part of the transport group na talagang apektado po nito, meron naman pong partnership with the DOTR, the LTFRB na mentioned earlier ni Kaobet, na nagbigay din po ng financial assistance for the transport sector through the Pantawid Pasada program. And then the Department of Energy ensures na yung mga oil companies would accept those Pantawid Pasada card para smooth yung transition. And then we continue to appeal to the oil companies na ipagpatuloy pa rin po yung pagbibigay ng discount sa ating mga transport sector.
Okay.
So if you look at the Department of Energy webpage, so may mga listahan po kami ng mga gas station na nagbibigay ng discount sa ating transport sector.
Sige pa. Maraming salamat po, Director Romero ng Department of Energy. On the global front, tensions in Ukraine and Russia, as discussed, are driving up the oil prices. Gretchen, let's have the latest. What do we know about this?
Robbie, tension between Russia and Ukraine has kept the market definitely on edge, even sending oil prices to a 7-year high. Prices tapered off on Tuesday, though, after Russia said that troops will be returning to their bases after completing their drills. Now, over in Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky called for a day of unity on February 16, which Western media cite as the possible start of Russian invasion. The possible Russian invasion of Ukraine will not only disrupt crude supplies, but it could also spark retaliatory sanctions by the United States. The U.S. has been warning of major military action for weeks, despite Russia's repeated claims that it does not plan to invade Ukraine. Now, these are the other big stories tonight. A terror plot by a militant Islamic organization was uncovered by the Philippine National Police. What exactly does this mean for the Philippines? Analysts weigh in on Pulse Asia's presidential survey, saying Marcos Jr.'s 44% lead at the start of the campaign season can still change as the election day draws near. And if you're still looking for an activity during the season of love, look no further. Spielberg's musical film West Side Story premieres in Philippine cinemas this week. These big stories after the break.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. A terror plot by a militant Islamic group was uncovered by the Philippine National Police Intelligence Group.
Authorities got the tip supposedly from a local linked to the Middle East-based militant group Hamas. They said the group is planning a proxy war in the Philippines. Reports are identifying the Hamas operative as one Bashir, who pledged financial support to local threat groups linked to international terrorist organizations. The source supposedly made several trips to Malaysia from 2016 to 2018 to discuss the possibility of staging an attack against Israeli nationals in the Philippines. The PNP IG said they are making efforts to hunt down the militant group to stop the terrorist acts.
This is a stern warning to all forebearers of fear and lawlessness, as well as terroristic groups who plan to conduct recruitment and similar activities in the country. We have a way to know you, and you cannot do your plans here. The full force of the PNP will hunt you down.
Let's delve a little deeper into this supposed Hamas terror plot. We have News 5 editor Manny Mogato with us. Good evening, Mogs. Mogs, medyo yung audio mo, medyo mahina pa.
Good evening, Robbie.
Okay, good evening. Mogs, sa tingin mo, I mean, we hear a lot of plots, a lot of reports, but how significant is this particular report regarding the Hamas?
Well, this is a very significant development because if the Iranian-backed Hamas group gains foothold in the country, it would launch many attacks against Western and Israeli targets. And it could make the Philippines a fertile ground for Islamic movements around the world. Maybe the IS can come back in the south.
Okay. Now, in the meantime, Manny, karamihan ng mga Muslim dito, Sunni. Di ba? I mean,
yes.
Would there be any group sympathetic to the Shias?
Of course, there are many Shia groups in the Philippines, especially in Lanao and Zamboanga. And in the past, Shia groups have been attacking the rival Sunni groups in Mindanao. And we saw many assassination attempts of some Islamic clerics that are Sunni linked. So this is not new. But if there is really a plot by Hamas to recruit operatives in the Philippines, this is very dangerous.
Okay, but apart from that, sinabi rin ng PNP, the targets are Israeli nationals in the Philippines. But of course, the big context for us is the coming elections. Anong implikasyon nito sa May 2022?
Well, Robbie, if you recall, may isang taon na, wala tayong terrorist attacks sa Mindanao, walang bombing, walang suicide bombing dyan sa Sulu at sa Basilan. Eh kung sakaling makarecruit itong Hamas, posibleng magkaroon kaguluhan sa darating na eleksyon. No? At alam mo, dyan sa may Maguindanao, marami diyang mga Israeli banana plantation technicians na pwede nilang targeted. No? At ang Pilipinas ay isa sa mga bansang nabiyayaan ng maraming military equipment ng Israel. Mga barko, mga missile, at posibleng may mga kumpanyang Israeli dito na potential target ng Hamas.
Okay, maraming salamat, Mogs. That was a News 5 editor, Manny Mogato.
Despite scoring a staggering lead in the survey, Pulse Asia says a Marcos victory is not yet cast in stone, with close to half of those polled still expected to change their minds. Mobile journalist Jacob Lazaro gives us a front seat to that story.
In the latest Pulse Asia survey, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. enjoys an unprecedented lead over his rivals, hitting 60% in the end of January. While this may seem like a titanic number, Ronald Holmes, president of the Pulse Asia, says the survey also shows that around half of those polled said that they could still change their minds before Election Day.
Halos kalahati ng mga botante nagsasabing maaari itong magbago o hindi na masabi kung magbabago o hindi magbabago.
Attorney Barry Gutierrez, spokesperson of Vice President Robredo, pointed out that the survey was conducted on January 19 to 24, which did not capture the Jessica Soho presidential interview, which Marcos skipped, and Holmes agreed.
Hindi pa nila masyadong ganap na nakuha kung ano nangyari doon sa Soho interview at yung kung ano man yung feedback sa hindi pagsipot o pagtanggi na ma-interview ang dating senador, no, na si Bongbong Marcos.
The question is, how willing are voters in a hyper-polarized election to cross from one extreme of the political fence to the other? According to Pulse Asia Executive Director Ana Tabunda, this is possible. She said that during the January survey, it was highly likely that Marcos got some of the votes of Robredo. Attorney Tony Lavinia, former dean of the Ateneo School of Government, said Marcos's message of unity appears to be working.
Unity, hindi kailangan magsabi ng detalye, di ba? Deny the past. That's very, very, very consistent yan.
While there might be 83 days before the election, both Lavinia and Holmes agreed that it is actually on April when voters make their final decision. These last-minute changes in voter behavior were also seen in the 2010 and 2016 presidential elections. Mobile journalist Jacob Lazaro, we are One News.
In hopes of further raising their survey numbers, top presidential aspirants continue to make the rounds across the Philippines. A look at how their campaign day went in this report by Gerard de la Peña.
As expected, petitioners calling for the disqualification of Ferdinand Marcos Jr. filed a motion for reconsideration on Tuesday. That's after the COMELEC First Division dismissed their case. They are insisting that Marcos Jr. was convicted of a crime involving moral turpitude. But for the former senator's camp, the poll body's decision is final. They call on petitioners to respect the COMELEC's decision and stop abusing the courts by filing cases that are allegedly based on lies. Over at the Lacson camp, they are responding to a different issue. This was after the Lacson-Soto tandem allegedly decided to remove former Vice President Jejomar Binay and Senator Richard Gordon from their Senate slate. But Senator Ping Lacson says their gentleman's agreement with the two still stands. Senator Soto has clarified that while they have yet to endorse the two, they still have not dropped them.
The other day, nag-uusap kami ni Senator Lacson, it's obvious that they are supporting other presidential and vice presidential candidates already. So we're limiting it to those who we think we're endorsing. It's not that we're removing them.
On the other hand, Manila Mayor Isko Moreno, while in Samar, also answered allegations of vote buying. This was after Moreno promised to give close to 8 million pesos in cash assistance to some 790 families displaced by a massive fire in Cavite.
And under exemption, may mga exemption sa batas katulad ng sa oras ng kalamidad o aberya, wala namang masamang tumulong. Ito'y tulong. Saka hindi naman ako mananalo ang presidente sa 719 pamilya. Tulong yon.
As for Vice President Leni Robredo, she and her team returned to Capiz where she kicked off her 2016 campaign. During her speech, Robredo continued their push for an honest government. She also played on the controversial 18 hours of work, saying that 18 hours a day is not enough for government workers and leaders, especially given the magnitude of work. Robredo will visit Boracay on Wednesday. She will also fly to Antique. For News 5, Gerard de la Peña, We Are One News.
For the big story in sports, Phil-Am skier Asa Miller will have a shot at redemption in the Beijing Winter Olympics as he competes in his second event, the men's slalom. After taking the day off on Monday, Miller took to the course not only to get his legs and arms to get the feel again, but to reset his focus. The Phil-Am skier crashed out of the giant slalom event last Sunday, just under 20 seconds into his first run. Raring to go, the 21-year-old hopes to end his Beijing Winter Olympics experience on a strong and positive note. Time for another quick break. When we return, the Kibuloy-backed SMNI debate pushes through with 4 presidential candidates, including Calyodi de Guzman, Norberto Gonzales, Ernesto Abella, and frontrunner Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Something's coming, something's good. Steven Spielberg's Oscar-nominated musical film West Side Story hits Philippine theaters this week. And from turon to flowers, supporters just can't help but hand out some goods to their election bets. Find out what Kiko Pangilinan received during a campaign in Capiz after the break.
Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. After the top presidential candidates backed out of the debate organized by the SMNI network of Pastor Apollo Kibuloy, 4 presidential candidates remain, including Ferdinand Marcos Jr., whom the pastor endorsed in the 2022 polls.
Candidates Calyodi de Guzman, Ernesto Abella, and Norberto Gonzales were also there. To give us updates, we have Camille Samonte on the line. Camille, we know this is still an ongoing event, but how's the atmosphere there?
Gretchen, Robbie, presidential bet Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Yodi de Guzman, Roberto Gonzales, and Ernesto Abella attended tonight's SMNI debate. Noticeably, the network left the podium supposedly for other presidentiables who were not present. In the first round, each candidate was asked about their key priorities if elected. De Guzman says he will prioritize the improvement of livelihood of fisher folk and farmers to ensure food security. He also pointed out that issues with healthcare systems should be addressed and needs of healthcare workers should be provided. Gonzales, meanwhile, will focus first on the structural changes in political system. He is proposing for a charter change. Marcos Jr., on the other hand, will prioritize creating jobs for Filipinos and extend assistance to MSMEs. He also wants to strengthen agricultural sector, saying it has been long neglected. As for Abella, he points out 3 ways to address the issues faced by the country. He also plans to make the agriculture in the Philippines a mega industry. So, Gretchen, Robbie, at this point, the candidates are now in the second round of the debate. They are currently answering the questions of the panelists. They are also given a 60 seconds to react or rebut to the answer of the other candidates. Robbie, Gretchen.
Maraming salamat, Camille Samonte. In other news, veteran broadcaster and former Press Secretary Ricardo Dong Puno Jr. passed away today. He was 76. Dong Puno passed away due to a lingering illness. That's according to his sons Ricky and Donnie. Dong Puno served as ABS-CBN Senior Vice President and was known as one of the hosts of several shows in the network, including Dong Puno Live and Insider. Puno served as former President Estrada's press secretary before he ran for senator in 2001. He lost in those elections, but in 2015, Puno was reported to be suffering from Parkinson's disease.
The Oscar season is now in full swing. We virtually sat down with the lead stars and genius director behind the 7-time nominated film revival of West Side Story. We chatted with Ansel Elgort, Rachel Zegler, the legendary direct Steven Spielberg. Spielberg says the 1957 musical theme resonates so much with the present times.
About love, the issues of love, conflict, and race. And xenophobia, and the fact that the Sharks and the Jets, their divide is not unlike a divide that we suffer here in this nation today.
The West Side Story is about the forbidden love of Tony and Maria and the ongoing gang rivalry of the Sharks and Jets. Spielberg said that the West Side Story influenced him in his youth.
And there's a whole generation that doesn't know West Side Story, and I'm hoping that generation will be able to be fulfilled as much as my generation was when the play first opened in 57.
The 2021 version of Spielberg still includes Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony winner Rita Moreno. Talented heartthrob Ansel Elgort stars as Tony and fresh-faced Rachel Zegler as Maria.
We were in Dumbo in Brooklyn rehearsing for 3 to 4 months before we even stepped on a set.
We really built a friendship because we had so much in common, both musical theater kids.
Besides being nominated for Best Director category, The West Side Story is also nominated in the Best Supporting Actress, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Production Design, and Best Sound categories for this year's Oscars. Filipino musical fans also have the chance to watch this masterpiece since it will be showing in theaters starting Valentine's Week. For News 5, MJ Marfori, we are One News.
The Lenny Kiko tandem headed to Capiz, where the streets turned pink and where it started to rain strawberry wafer sticks.
While meeting with supporters, Vice Presidential candidate Kiko Pangilinan caught a jar of sticko. Let's watch this. Nag-tweet pa siya, sabi niya, dapat all sinasalo. May hugot.
Kayo alam nyo na kung anong merienda dito bukas ha. Asahan nyo yan.
Pasensya na, wag ka na umasa. Mahal yun eh. Yung turon, kaya ka pang ipaluto.
Tsaka dire-diretso ang report mo ngayon eh.
Hindi na mauulit. That wraps up this big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250.
Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. Mask on.
Wash
And
hands.
stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
And I'm Gretchen Ho. We are One News. Have a good evening.